The autumn afternoon was peaceful at Lincoln Park, with golden leaves scattered across the well-maintained pathways. Marcus Thompson, a 15-year-old honor student from Lincoln High School, had just finished his basketball practice. His muscles were tired, but his mind was alert as he settled onto his favorite bench near the park's central fountain. He pulled out his phone to check his messages and wait for his mother, who would pick him up in about 30 minutes. Marcus wore his school's red and white basketball uniform, with a light jacket thrown over it to keep warm in the October breeze. His gym bag rested beside him on the bench, and he had his student ID card safely tucked in his pocket, something his parents had always insisted he carry. As the son of Mayor Diana Thompson, Marcus had been raised to be mindful of his surroundings and always carry identification. A few yards away, Sarah Whitman was walking her golden retriever, Max. She had recently moved to the area from a smaller town and was still adjusting to city life. Sarah noticed Marcus sitting alone on the bench and immediately tensed up. She had read posts on her neighborhood Facebook group about recent thefts in the area, and seeing a young black teenager alone in the park triggered her predetermined biases. Sarah tightened her grip on Max's leash and pulled out her phone. She walked in circles, pretending to be on a casual stroll while keeping her eyes fixed on Marcus. The teenager noticed her suspicious glances, but chose to ignore them, focusing instead on responding to his teammates' messages about their upcoming game. "Hello, police." Sarah spoke into her phone, trying to keep her voice down. "I'd like to report suspicious activity at Lincoln Park, near the central fountain." She described Marcus, emphasizing that he had been lurking on the bench for several minutes and had a large bag with him. Marcus could hear fragments of her conversation and felt his heart sink. He had experienced similar situations before, and his parents had prepared him for moments like these. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Stay calm, be polite, and remember who you are." The dispatcher on the other end asked Sarah, "Has this person done anything threatening?" "Well, no," Sarah admitted, "but he's been sitting there for a while, and he keeps looking at his phone. He could be coordinating with others. I just feel something isn't right." Marcus considered calling his mother immediately but decided to wait. At 15, he wanted to prove he could handle difficult situations maturely. He remained seated, deliberately keeping his hands visible and his movements slow and predictable, another lesson his parents had taught him. Other park visitors began to notice the tension building. An elderly man walking his dog slowed down to observe the situation. A young couple on a nearby bench exchanged concerned glances, recognizing the all-too-familiar scene unfolding before them. Within minutes, 2 police cars pulled up to the park entrance, their lights flashing but sirens silent. Sarah felt a surge of relief, believing she had done the right thing by reporting her suspicions. She stepped closer to the arriving officers, eager to share her concerns in person. Marcus took a deep breath and sat up straight. His hands were slightly shaking, but his face remained composed. He could feel his phone buzzing in his hand, probably his mother checking in on him, but he knew better than to make any sudden movements now. The first officer, Officer Rodriguez, approached with his hand casually resting on his belt. His partner, Officer Chen, stayed a few steps behind, surveying the scene. "Good afternoon," Officer Rodriguez called out. "We received a call about suspicious activity in this area. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Marcus responded clearly and calmly, just as he had been taught. "No problem, officer. I'm just waiting for my ride after basketball practice." He gestured toward his school uniform visible under his jacket. Sarah watched from a short distance, nodding approvingly at the police presence. She felt vindicated in her decision to call them, even as a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that perhaps she had overreacted. What none of them knew at that moment was that this incident was about to take an unexpected turn. Marcus had indeed texted his mother, Mayor Diana Thompson, and she was already on her way to the park. The next few minutes would become a powerful lesson about assumptions, privilege, and the importance of looking beyond one's own biases. Little did Sarah know that her simple call to the police was about to become a turning point not just in her life, but in the entire community's approach to racial profiling and public safety. The autumn breeze carried whispers and stares as Officers Rodriguez and Chen continued their questioning of Marcus. The young teen sat perfectly still on the bench, his basketball uniform a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere surrounding him. A small crowd of parkgoers had begun to gather at a respectful distance. many with phones discreetly recording the interaction. "Can I see some identification?" Officer Rodriguez asked, maintaining a professional tone. Marcus slowly reached for his student ID, careful to narrate his movements. "I'm getting my school ID from my jacket pocket, sir," he said clearly, remembering his parents' careful instructions about interactions with law enforcement. The ID card showed Marcus in his school blazer, an honor roll pin visible on his lapel. Officer Chen glanced at it, then at the gym bag beside Marcus. "Mind if we take a look in your bag?" she asked, her voice gentler than her partner's. "It's just my basketball gear," Marcus explained calmly. "I have practice every Thursday with Coach Williams. You can call him to verify if you'd like." He unzipped the bag slowly, revealing his basketball shoes, a water bottle, and a sweat-soaked practice uniform. Sarah Wickman, who had initiated this situation, stood nearby with her golden retriever, Max. Her initial certainty began to waver as she watched the peaceful young man interact respectfully with the officers. The sight of his school ID and basketball equipment made her stomach tighten with the first pangs of doubt. A young mother with 2 children walked past, slowing down to witness the scene. Her older child, about 7 years old, tugged at her sleeve and asked loudly, "Mommy, why are the police talking to that boy? Did he do something wrong?" The mother hurriedly shushed her child, but the question hung in the air, making several onlookers shift uncomfortably. Officer Rodriguez radioed dispatch to run a check on Marcus's information, standard procedure in such situations. The crackle of the radio seemed unusually loud in the tense atmosphere. "Dispatch, can you run a check on a Marcus Thompson, student at Lincoln High School?" Before dispatch could respond, another call came through that would change everything. The dispatcher's voice was different this time, carrying a note of urgency. "All units at Lincoln Park, be advised. Mayor Thompson is en route to your location. She claims the subject in question is her son." The effect was immediate. Officer Chen's eyes widened slightly, and Officer Rodriguez's posture shifted. Sarah, still within earshot, felt the color drain from her face as she processed this new information. Her dog, Max, sensing the change in atmosphere, whined softly at her feet. Marcus remained seated, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had known this moment was coming but had chosen to handle the situation on his own terms first. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, undoubtedly his mother updating him on her arrival time. The growing crowd of onlookers had caught the radio exchange, and a ripple of murmurs spread through them. Several more phones emerged to record what was quickly becoming a significant local incident. A jogger who had stopped to watch quickly pulled out her phone and began typing frantically on social media. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat, clearly reassessing the situation. "Mr. Thompson," his tone notably more formal now, "we appreciate your cooperation. Can you tell us more about your usual routine here at the park?" Marcus nodded, maintaining his composure. "I've been coming here after basketball practice since I started high school. The bench has good shade, and it's a convenient pickup spot. Most of the regular park visitors know me." He gestured toward an elderly man who had been watching the scene unfold. The man nodded in confirmation, having seen Marcus many Thursday afternoons before. Sarah's dog pulled at his leash, wanting to leave, but she stood frozen in place. The realization that she had called the police on the mayor's son was beginning to sink in. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone, perhaps to delete her recent call to emergency services, as if that could somehow undo what she had set in motion. The sound of rapid footsteps on the park path signaled the approach of someone walking with purpose. The crowd parted, and all eyes turned toward the figure striding toward them. Mayor Diana Thompson, still in her business suit from a city council meeting, her expression a careful mixture of maternal concern and executive authority. The next few moments would become a powerful lesson in prejudice, power, and the consequences of hasty judgments. The atmosphere in Lincoln Park shifted dramatically as Mayor Diana Thompson's voice cut through the tension. Her heels clicked purposefully against the concrete path as she approached the scene, her navy blue business suit and pearl necklace reflecting her interrupted city council meeting. The crowd of onlookers parted like waves before her, smartphones still recording every moment of the unfolding drama. "I received a concerning text from my son," Mayor Thompson announced, her voice carrying the perfect balance of maternal worry and administrative authority. She had mastered this dual role over her years in office. being both a public figure and a protective mother. Would someone please explain why there are two police units questioning a teenager who was simply waiting for his ride? Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen straightened their postures instinctively. The mayor's presence commanded attention, but it was her calm demeanor that truly controlled the situation. Sarah Whitman, still clutching her golden retriever's leash, tried to make herself invisible behind a nearby tree, but the mayor's sharp eyes had already noticed her. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez began, "we received a call about suspicious activity." "Suspicious activity?" Mayor Thompson interrupted, her eyebrow raised. "What exactly is suspicious about a young man in his school basketball uniform sitting on a park bench?" Her words weren't angry, but they carried weight that made everyone present feel the need to reflect on their actions. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the police radio again. "Attention units at Lincoln Park, be advised. Subject Marcus Thompson is confirmed as the mayor's son. He has no record and is registered in the system as a student athlete at Lincoln High School." Sarah's dog, Max, whined softly, perhaps sensing his owner's growing distress. The crowd had grown larger, with many park visitors slowing their walks or stopping entirely to witness this increasingly significant moment. Several people were typing rapidly on their phones, no doubt sharing the story on social media. Marcus remained seated on the bench, maintaining his composure, though a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he watched his mother take command of the situation. He had seen her in action at community meetings and public events, but this was different. This was personal. "Mom," Marcus called out softly, "I handled it just like you and Dad taught me." His voice carried a hint of pride, showing maturity beyond his 15 years. Mayor Thompson's expression softened momentarily as she looked at her son, but her professional demeanor quickly returned. She turned to address the officers directly. "I understand you were responding to a call, and I appreciate your professional conduct. However, this situation highlights exactly why our city needs the new community policing initiatives I've been proposing." The officers nodded in agreement, looking slightly uncomfortable. Officer Chen spoke up, "Mayor Thompson, we were just following protocol for a reported suspicious person." "And who?" the mayor asked, turning slowly to face the growing crowd. "Decided my son was suspicious." Her voice wasn't accusatory, but it carried a weight that made Sarah step forward involuntarily, her face flushed with embarrassment. The crowd watched as Sarah emerged from behind the tree, her dog Max now sitting obediently at her feet. The golden retriever's tail wagged slightly, completely unaware of the tension in the air. Several onlookers whispered among themselves, recognizing her as the one who had made the call. I'm the one who called," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw." She struggled to find words that wouldn't make the situation worse. Mayor Thompson held up a hand, silencing Sarah's stammering explanation. "We'll address this properly," she said, pulling out her phone and checking her calendar. "I'm calling an emergency community meeting for tomorrow evening. I think this incident deserves a larger discussion about assumptions, community safety, and what it means to truly look out for one another." The mayor's words carried both authority and invitation. She wasn't just addressing Sarah or the officers, but everyone present. Several people in the crowd nodded in agreement, understanding that they were witnessing more than just an uncomfortable confrontation. This was becoming a moment of potential change for their community. As the tension began to dissipate, Marcus stood up from the bench, gathering his basketball gear. He moved with the same careful deliberation he had shown throughout the incident, aware that even now, his actions were being watched and judged. His mother placed a protective hand on his shoulder, both a gesture of comfort and a statement to everyone present. This was her son, and this situation would not be forgotten. The story was far from over, but it was about to take an unexpected turn that would impact the entire community. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lincoln Park as Mayor Diana Thompson stood protectively beside her son Marcus. Her presence had transformed the scene from a tense police questioning into something entirely different, a powerful moment that would soon become a catalyst for community change. Sarah Whitman's face had cycled through several shades of red as the realization of her actions sank in deeper with each passing moment. Her golden retriever, Max, sat quietly beside her, occasionally glancing up at his owner's distressed face. The crowd of onlookers had grown to nearly 30 people, their phones capturing every moment of this increasingly significant encounter. "Officers," Mayor Thompson addressed the police with measured calm, "I'd like to see the official call report." Her voice carried the authority of her office, but there was something else in it too, the unmistakable edge of a mother's protective instinct. She hadn't released her gentle grip on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes to everyone watching. Officer Rodriguez fumbled slightly with his tablet, pulling up the report. The call came in at 4:17 p.m. He began, reading from the screen. The caller reported, and I quote, "suspicious male teenager lurking on a park bench." He paused, the words sounding increasingly hollow as he read them aloud. "Lurking?" Mayor Thompson repeated, her eyebrow raised. She gestured to the basketball court visible just 50 yards away, then to Marcus's school uniform and gym bag. "My son has been coming to this park after basketball practice every Thursday for the past 2 years. He sits on this exact bench, waiting for his ride home." A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant sounds of children playing on the park's playground. The contrast between the innocent background noise and the tense situation at hand was striking. Several parents who had been watching from the playground began moving closer, drawn to the unfolding drama. Marcus stood tall beside his mother, his composure unwavering. He had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal, and now that composure seemed to highlight the absurdity of the situation even more. His phone buzzed again, probably messages from teammates who had heard about what was happening. "Mrs. Whitman," Mayor Thompson said, turning to face Sarah directly. She had recognized her from various community meetings, though they'd never spoken personally. "Would you please explain what exactly about my son appeared suspicious to you?" Sarah clutched Max's leash tighter, her knuckles white with tension. I just moved here 3 months ago," she stammered. "There have been posts on the neighborhood Facebook group about recent thefts, and I thought." Her voice trailed off as she realized how weak her explanation sounded. "You thought what, exactly?" The mayor pressed, her voice firm but not unkind. "That a young black athlete in his school uniform, sitting in broad daylight in a public park, was planning to commit a crime." The crowd grew quieter, if possible, as the mayor's words hung in the air. Several people shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing similar assumptions they had made in their own lives. Officer Chen discreetly took a step back, her body language suggesting she wanted to distance herself from the situation. "Mom," Marcus spoke up, his voice steady and mature. "Maybe we could use this as an opportunity. Remember that community outreach program you've been wanting to start?" His suggestion carried wisdom beyond his years, showing that even in this difficult moment, he was thinking about solutions rather than just problems. Mayor Thompson's expression softened as she looked at her son with pride. This was the same boy who had maintained his honor roll status while playing varsity basketball, the same teenager who volunteered at the local community center on weekends. And yet, to some, he was still just a suspicious figure in a park. A local news van pulled up quietly at the park's entrance, drawn by the multiple social media posts about the incident. The story was growing beyond just a park encounter. It was becoming a moment that would force the community to confront its hidden biases and assumptions. Sarah's dog Max had finally laid down at her feet, perhaps sensing that they would be there for a while. The golden retriever's peaceful presence seemed to highlight the unnecessary tension that human assumptions and fears had created in what should have been a routine afternoon in the park. The mayor took a deep breath, straightening her pearl necklace, a habit she had when preparing to address difficult situations. This moment would require both her roles, the diplomatic touch of a mayor and the protective instinct of a mother. The next few minutes would prove crucial in determining how this incident would affect their community's future. The golden hour sunlight bathed Lincoln Park in warm hues as Mayor Diana Thompson prepared to address the situation that had spiraled from a simple misunderstanding into a community watershed moment. The crowd had grown even larger, with local news reporters positioning themselves at the edges, their cameras capturing every word and gesture. "Let's all take a seat," Mayor Thompson suggested, gesturing to the nearby benches. Her voice carried the same authority she used in city council meetings, but with an added layer of personal investment. "This conversation is too important to have standing around like this." Marcus sat beside his mother, his basketball bag at his feet. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen reluctantly took seats across from them, while Sarah Whitman, still holding Max's leash tightly, settled on a bench slightly apart from the others. The crowd formed a loose semicircle around them, phone still recording. "Mrs. Whitman," the mayor began, smoothing her navy blue skirt, "I'd like you to look at my son and tell me exactly what you saw today that warranted a police response." Her words were measured, not angry, but carried the weight of years of similar experiences. Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke. I saw someone sitting alone, checking their phone repeatedly. The neighborhood watch group has been warning about teenagers organizing thefts through their phones, and I just thought." She stopped, realizing how each word made her position sound worse. "What you actually saw," Mayor Thompson corrected gently, "was a student athlete taking a moment to rest after practice, a young man who maintains a 3.8 GPA while playing varsity basketball. A teenager who volunteers teaching kids to read at the community center every weekend." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But you didn't see any of that, did you?" Max, sensing his owner's distress, placed his head in Sarah's lap. The simple gesture of comfort made Sarah's eyes well up with tears. "I made a terrible mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Mayor Thompson, I want to acknowledge that we could have handled this differently. Perhaps a simple conversation first, before assuming the worst," the mayor finished for him. "Yes, that's exactly the point. This isn't just about today's incident. This is about a pattern that needs to change." She turned to address the growing crowd. "How many other Marcus Thompsons are out there, being viewed as suspicious for simply existing in public spaces?" A local reporter raised her hand respectfully. "Mayor Thompson, would you say this incident reflects a larger issue in our community?" The mayor nodded, but it was Marcus who spoke up. "May I answer that?" he asked his mother. When she nodded, he continued, "This happens more often than people realize. Today was different only because my mom happens to be the mayor. Most kids like me don't have that protection." His words hit hard. Several people in the crowd looked down at their feet, perhaps remembering times they had made similar assumptions. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, her dog Max still offering silent comfort. "Here's what we're going to do," Mayor Thompson announced, switching fully into her mayoral role. "Tomorrow evening, I'm calling an emergency community meeting. Mrs. Whitman, I expect you to be there." She looked directly at Sarah, who nodded quickly. "Officers, I want you both there as well, along with the police chief." The news reporters scribbled frantically in their notepads. This was evolving from a personal incident into a catalyst for community change. "But right now," the mayor continued, her voice softening as she placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, "I'm taking my son home. He has homework to do and a basketball game to prepare for tomorrow night." She stood up, every inch the powerful figure she was, but also every bit the protective mother. As they prepared to leave, Sarah suddenly stood up, gently pulling Max with her. "Marcus," she called out, her voice shaky but determined. "I am so sorry. I should have just said hello. I should have." Marcus turned to her with a maturity that made many observers catch their breath. "Maybe you can start by coming to tomorrow's game," he suggested. "It's against our biggest rivals. You might see that I'm pretty good at stealing, but only on the basketball court." His small joke broke some of the tension, causing a ripple of relieved laughter through the crowd. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the park. What had started as a confrontation was ending with the first tentative steps toward understanding. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the real work of changing hearts and minds was just beginning. The community center's main hall buzzed with anticipation the following evening. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Mayor Diana Thompson had chosen this venue deliberately, a neutral space that belonged to everyone in the community. Marcus sat in the front row, still in his basketball uniform from the game he'd just won. His team's victory against their rivals had been spectacular, with Marcus scoring the winning three-pointer in the final seconds. Several of his teammates had come to support him, their red and white jerseys scattered throughout the crowd. Sarah Whitman arrived early, choosing a seat in the second row. Her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap, no longer holding Max's leash for comfort. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen sat nearby, along with Police Chief Harrison, all in their formal uniforms. The local news crews had set up their cameras at strategic points around the room. "Good evening, everyone," Mayor Thompson began, standing at the podium. She wore a different suit today, a warm burgundy color that projected both authority and approachability. We're here because yesterday, something happened that occurs far too often in our community. But today, we have an opportunity to learn from it. The room fell silent as the mayor recounted the previous day's events. Sarah's face flushed as her actions were described, but she forced herself to sit straight and face the community she had so recently joined. "Mrs. Whitman," the mayor said, "would you please join me up here?" Sarah's legs shook slightly as she made her way to the podium. "Now, I want you to share what you've learned in the past 24 hours. Sarah gripped the edges of the podium, facing the crowded room. "I've hardly slept," she began, her voice trembling. "I kept thinking about what I did, about the assumptions I made." She turned to look at Marcus. "I was at the game tonight. I watched you lead your team to victory. I saw how everyone, players, coaches, parents, respects you, and I felt ashamed that I had only seen what my fears wanted me to see." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in understanding, perhaps recognizing their own biases in Sarah's words. Marcus raised his hand to speak. His mother nodded, and he stood up, his tall frame still in his basketball jersey. "Yesterday, I was just another black teenager in the park. Today, I'm a basketball hero. But I'm the same person. The only thing that changed was how people chose to see me." His words hit home. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Chief Harrison stood up next, adjusting his badge before speaking. "Mayor Thompson, if I may," he began. "This incident has made it clear that we need to revise our response protocols. A call about suspicious activity should not automatically trigger a police response without proper assessment." The mayor nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of institutional change we need. But we also need personal change." She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. "I have here a proposal for a new community initiative called Know Your Neighbor." She outlined the program: weekly community gatherings, youth police basketball games, cultural exchange events, and implicit bias training for all city employees, including law enforcement. "But it starts with small steps," she continued. "Mrs. Whitman, would you be willing to help coordinate these events? To turn your experience into something positive?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Yes, absolutely," she stammered. "I want to make things right." Marcus stood up again. "I'll help too," he offered. "Maybe we could start with basketball coaching for kids. Break down barriers through sports." The energy in the room shifted from tension to possibility. People began raising their hands, offering suggestions and volunteering to help. The news reporters scribbled frantically, their story changing from one of conflict to one of community transformation. "This," Mayor Thompson said, her voice carrying both authority and emotion, "is how change happens. Not through shame or blame, but through understanding and action." As the meeting continued, plans were made and committees formed. Sarah and Marcus ended up sitting together, brainstorming ideas for youth activities. Officer Rodriguez volunteered to coach alongside Marcus, and Chief Harrison promised to revise police response protocols within the week. The learning moment was transforming into action, proving that sometimes the most painful incidents can lead to the most powerful changes. As the evening drew to a close, it was clear that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a misunderstanding in a park. The story of what happened in Lincoln Park spread far beyond the city limits. 2 weeks after the incident, the local newspaper's headline read, "Park Incident Sparks Revolutionary Change in Community Relations." The article, featuring a photo of Marcus Thompson and Sarah Whitman organizing a youth basketball clinic together, had gone viral on social media. The community center's gymnasium buzzed with activity on a Saturday morning. Marcus stood in the middle of the court, surrounded by eager young players from diverse backgrounds. He had traded his competitive game face for a patient smile as he demonstrated proper shooting technique to a group of elementary school children. "Remember what Marcus taught us," Sarah called out from the sidelines, where she was helping organize the next group of young players. "It's not just about basketball, it's about trust and teamwork." She had found her place in this new initiative, surprising everyone, including herself, with her dedication to making things right. Local news crews had become regular visitors to these weekend sessions, but today was special. A national news network had sent a team to cover what they called the Lincoln Park model, a new approach to community policing and racial understanding that had begun with one tense encounter. Mayor Thompson watched from the bleachers, taking notes for her upcoming presentation at the National Mayor's Conference. Her phone buzzed constantly with requests from other cities wanting to learn more about their program. She had already received invitations to speak at 3 police academies about community-oriented policing. Mayor Thompson called out the national news reporter, microphone in hand. "Did you ever imagine that your son's experience would lead to such widespread change?" The mayor smiled, watching Marcus high-five a young girl who had just made her first basket. "Sometimes," she replied, "the most powerful changes come from the most painful moments. But it's what you do with those moments that matters." Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen had become regular fixtures at the weekend clinics, not in their uniforms but in casual clothes, playing alongside the kids. Their example had inspired other officers to join in, breaking down barriers between law enforcement and the community one game at a time. "Hey, Sarah," Marcus called out, waving her over to help with the demonstration. "Remember how we first met? Want to show these kids how to turn a negative into a positive." Sarah jogged onto the court, now comfortable in her role as program coordinator. The children gathered around as she and Marcus shared their story, not for the first time, but with the same sincerity that made it powerful each time they told it. "I made a mistake," Sarah explained to the attentive young faces. "I judged someone without knowing them. But look at us now. We're friends, we're making a difference, and we're showing everyone how to do better." The gymnasium doors opened as more families arrived for the afternoon session. Among them was Mrs. Chen, Officer Chen's mother, carrying trays of homemade dumplings for the post-practice community lunch. These shared meals had become a tradition, with families from different backgrounds bringing dishes to share. Social media buzzed with updates about the program. The hashtag Lincoln Park model was trending nationally, with videos of the basketball clinics and community meetings being shared thousands of times. Messages poured in from around the country, asking how to implement similar programs. Chief Harrison stood at the entrance, greeting families as they arrived. He had become a vocal advocate for police reform, using the Lincoln Park incident as a case study in his department's new training programs. "It's not just about changing policies," he often said. "It's about changing hearts and minds." The local newspaper had dedicated a weekly column to following the program's progress. Today's edition featured interviews with several participants, including a touching quote from a 10-year-old player. "Before, I was scared of police officers. Now Officer Rodriguez is teaching me how to dribble better than Marcus." Mayor Thompson finished her interview with the national news crew and walked over to where Marcus and Sarah were working with the kids. She watched as her son, now seen as a community leader rather than a suspicious teenager, helped a young boy perfect his jump shot. "Mom," Marcus called out, "want to join us? We're showing them that teamwork breaks down barriers." The mayor slipped off her heels, stepped onto the court in her business suit, and joined the circle of players. The national news cameras captured the moment. A mayor, her son, and the woman who had once called the police on him, all working together to build something positive from what could have been a tragic misunderstanding. The impact was clear. What had started as a confrontation in a park had become a model for community transformation, proving that change was possible when people chose to learn from their mistakes and work together for a better future. 6 months after the incident in Lincoln Park, the community gathered for a special ceremony. The old park bench where Marcus had once sat, the spot that sparked a citywide transformation, was being dedicated as a symbol of change. A small bronze plaque now read, "Where Understanding Begins. The Lincoln Park Model, 2024. Mayor Diana Thompson stood at the podium, her voice carrying across the crowded park. The audience included familiar faces. Marcus in his college acceptance sweatshirt from Stanford University, where he'd earned both academic and basketball scholarships, Sarah Whitman, now the full-time director of community relations, and dozens of young athletes from their weekend programs. 6 months ago, this bench represented division. The mayor began, gesturing to the newly restored seat. Today, it represents how far we've come and how far we can still go. The statistics spoke for themselves. Police incident reports involving youth had dropped by 70%. Community participation in local government meetings had tripled. The weekend basketball clinics had expanded to include mentoring programs, tutoring sessions, and cultural exchange events. What started as a crisis had blossomed into a movement. Sarah stepped up to share her perspective, Max the golden retriever still faithfully by her side. "I stand here not just as someone who made a mistake," she said, her confidence having grown over the months, "but as someone who learned that change is always possible." Our program has now been adopted by 12 other cities. The crowd applauded as Marcus joined them at the podium. He had become somewhat of a local celebrity, but remained the same grounded young man who had handled that tense situation with such maturity. "When I sit on this bench now," he said, "I see something different. I see kids of all backgrounds playing basketball together. I see police officers teaching defensive moves instead of being defensive. I see a community that chose to grow." Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen, both recently promoted to community liaison positions, stood nearby in their new uniforms, designed specifically for their community engagement roles. The police department had undergone significant changes, with their new training program, developed in part from the Lincoln Park incident, becoming a model for departments nationwide. "Our work isn't finished," Chief Harrison added, taking his turn to speak. "But we've created a foundation for real change." Every new officer now spends their first month in community engagement before ever putting on a uniform. The ceremony continued with the unveiling of new community initiatives. The Know Your Neighbor program had evolved into a comprehensive system of community support and understanding. Local businesses had joined in, offering internships to youth and sponsoring cultural events. A group of students from Lincoln High School performed a short play they had written about the incident and its aftermath. Their performance brought tears to many eyes, especially when they reached the scene where Sarah and Marcus first worked together to create change. Looking ahead, Mayor Thompson announced, "We've secured funding for a new community center to be built right here in Lincoln Park. It will house our basketball programs, cultural exchange events, and educational initiatives. And yes," she smiled, "the original bench will have a special place inside." Marcus, preparing to leave for college in the fall, had already trained a new generation of youth coaches to continue his work. "This was never just about basketball," he explained to a reporter. "It was about seeing each other as people first. The game just gave us a way to start the conversation." Sarah had transformed too. From the nervous woman who once called the police out of fear, she had become a confident community leader. She now conducted workshops on overcoming bias and building bridges between different communities. Her story of change had become as powerful as the incident itself. The ceremony concluded with a friendly basketball game, community members, police officers, and kids all playing together on the court where Marcus had once practiced alone. The sound of laughter and cheerful competition filled the air, replacing the tension that had once hung over this space. As the sun set over Lincoln Park, Mayor Thompson, Marcus, and Sarah sat together on the historic bench, watching the game. They had all changed, grown, and learned from that day 6 months ago. But more importantly, they had shown their community, and now the nation, that positive change was possible when people chose understanding over fear. "You know," Marcus said, looking at the playing children, "sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes." Sarah nodded, watching Max play with some of the kids. "And sometimes," she added, "the hardest lessons teach us the most important things." Mayor Thompson smiled, proud of both her son and her community. "This isn't the end of our story," she said. "It's just the beginning of a new chapter." Indeed, the Lincoln Park model had become more than just a program. It was a blueprint for how communities across the country could face their challenges, overcome their biases, and move forward together.